Okay, so continuing on our blitz of non-battleground swing states, we've covered Virginia, we've covered New Hampshire, we've got a great video on North Carolina, and we've covered Virginia. We're going to go ahead and cover the swing battleground states as well. But the last one we want to touch on in terms of these non-battleground swing states, what that means is states that are swing states where there is really no campaigning going on or very little campaigning going on, kind of like Hillary in Wisconsin in 2016. Um, so these states can flip. They absolutely can. There's just not a lot going on there in terms of efforts to make them swing. Um, and in this one, we're going to talk about Minnesota. And again, as I mentioned, I think in past videos, I've had some issues in past videos where I've really had things zoomed out a little bit too much. And so I'm trying to zoom them in for you so you can view a little bit better, work a little bit on the audio and video here. And then also I've prepared some just statements just to really speed things along. So apologies if I'm reading and whatnot, but you're going to get the picture. Very important that you just get the bullet points and the data. I don't want to go on a rambling spree with all the different data points that are here. So with that said, let's talk about Minnesota. So Minnesota is the most stubbornly blue state in the Midwest. Walter Mondale's state was the sole blue state in his failed bid and looks to remain blue with its governor, Tim Walz, on the VP ticket, unless Trump has something to do with it, but it doesn't seem like likely. Minnesota is listed as a toss-up state in the Real Clear Politics map. It has been polling within the margin of error, so there's a reason for that. But the early turnout makes it look like it's really very strongly Democrat. And given that Tim Walz is on the ticket, that kind of makes some sense. So Minnesota is easily the most progressive policy state in the Midwest as well. Apologies. Minnesota does not register voters by party, so some of this is not super reliable data that we're going to look at, but we do have some polls that are going to be basically based off of the 2020 recall vote, which we've talked about in previous videos, where you're really building a demographic on the basis of who has voted. When you're talking to your registrants, who did you vote for in 2020? Did you vote? Did you vote for Trump or did you vote for Biden? And try to match that up with the actual results. From 2020 to make sure that you're getting an accurate sampling. And there have been some issues with that in the past. In particular, New York Times is really bad at it, egregiously bad. Don't trust any of the New York Times polls. They're going to be very wrong. They are way oversampling Biden voters from 2020. If you see a 2-point margin in Harris's favor, New York Times, it probably means the opposite. That's just the way that it's been. Most of the other pollsters are really good about it. New York Times, Morning Consult, uh, um, USA Today, Suffolk, uh, Survey USA, actually, I should say, in not USA Today, Suffolk, but Survey USA, New York Times, and Morning Consult. All of them egregiously bad at that. Um, I'm getting off topic here, but in any case, um, because you don't have those party line registrations in Minnesota, some of it's left up to exit polling and things like that. So there's a pretty large margin of error there. Uh, and so while Minnesota does not have registered voters by party, it has historically polled at about a 7% Democrat lean, according to Pew Research. So in 2020, Biden predictably carried Minnesota by 7.2, but polling was uncharacteristically much closer to 4.3 average, which you're seeing right over here in terms of raw average is about 4.7. The previous cycle, though, Clinton won by a slim 1.5% in spite of polls running anywhere from 8 to 11%. So we're talking about massive swings going from 8 to 11% all the way down to 1.5%. So these pollsters do have a huge capability to be wrong. 4.5% is way too close. It could very easily swing for Trump. But if we look at the numbers here, and you can see the weighted margin of average is bringing it down. I'm sorry, margin of error is bringing it down by about 1 point. If you're looking at the recall rebalance, you're going to see they're actually oversampling Trumpers or Republicans. Um, And if we're looking at, let's go ahead and get rid of the recall rebalance and look at the scorecard margin of error. Yeah, scorecard rather. 3.6 is the weighted margin of error. If we just go with the standard um, Nate Silver and RCP scorecard, not much of a difference there. 3.6% loss. That's kind of what we're expecting to see. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Minnesota early voter breakdown. As you can see here, all of the recall vote rebalance, by the way, is based off of the 2020 election. None of it's based off of party affiliation. So there is a bit of over sampling Republicans or Trump voters for that matter. um, Early vote, tremendously bad for Trump and tremendously good for Harris. Republicans are barely showing up at all. Um, Democrats are showing up in spades. 42 to 21 gap. It's a huge gap for 45% of the likely electorate having already voted. Um, Women are showing up marginally lower than the national average at 50%. They're showing up roughly in line with what their actual population is, as you can see, 50 to 50. Men are just underperforming the national average. So the gender disparity here is not terrible. Women are underperforming against the national average, which is unusual that they're underperforming more so than men are. The 65 plus demographic is overperforming the national average. You have a smaller 65% plus 65 plus percentage in Minnesota than some of the other battlegrounds. 17.8 is just slightly higher than the national average, which I believe is 17.7. But yeah, exactly. So there's your margin right there. Um, this looks like this is an error. Let's see, 50.18. This should be a percentage here. So let's just go ahead and fix that. There we go. Slightly underperforming the national average and for women and slightly overperforming before performing for men. That benefits the GOP by about zero point 0.6 based off of the gender gaps, but it looks like it's too much of a margin to overcome. You've got 55% of the vote remaining. It's going to be majority. It looks like it's going to be majority men based off of the fact that women have largely been voting here and men sort of are going to show up at the polls to sort of try to drive that, rebalance that undervoting potential. But the gap here is just absolutely tremendous. You do have an advantage. Trump does have an advantage with unaffiliated voters, new voters, and so in that regard, low info voters, et cetera, in that regard, he could make up some ground. But we're talking about pretty big, 21 points that he's got to make up here. And Republicans just are not showing up. So it does look like just by the numbers, too large of a margin to sort of overcome. That said, 25% of unaffiliated, if he carries, um, 2/3 of those, he's going to make up a gap of about what does that come out to? Say 7 roughly percent. So he'll make up some ground there. I didn't do the math, so don't hold me to that exact math right there. But yeah, he could make up some ground in unaffiliated voters if he carries the large majority of them. Some Republicans could show up to the polls. So yeah, it's possible he could make up for it, but Democrats are also showing up in spades here. So this is a pretty large gap. Given that Tim Walz is on the ticket, it seems unlikely he'll overcome that. Seems like Minnesota's going to stay blue. Okay, so as we go through each of these, there are some important references you need to know. If you look at the spreadsheet itself and you dive down into any of the given tabs, you should see references for individual breakdowns for the actual source information for registered voters, likely voters, 65 plus demographics and ratios for populations of men to women, Republican and Democrat registrations. Not all states do party affiliation registrations. Some of them do. Most of them do. Many of them don't require it. So you do have a lot of unaffiliated as well. So that sort of muddies the water a little bit. But bottom line is you'll see the references listed there. The actual references for poll data all comes from the Real Clear polling tabulation. We don't actually use their values. We just actually use that as sort of an aggregator for polling. So if you were to look at, I don't know, let's say Arizona, we're gathering all the polls that are listed here. We're not taking the rounded figures. We're only taking them when that's the only thing that's provided. So oftentimes, actually providing the fractional differences, um, as well as sourcing the crosstab data for anomalies and uh, inaccuracies in the demographic breakdowns related to registered and unregistered users or voters rather. So bottom line is all the data comes from here. We actually open up each of these, or I really do, and read the source data if it's provided as often as it's provided, and then provide sort of breakdowns. As you can see, New Hampshire here, where there, are more accurate figures, where there are inaccuracies in or a disparity between the real results of 2020 and the what they call the recall vote in 2024 on 2020 results. Bottom line is they're coming from Real Clear polling. We don't use their average. We use our own. And then we use the early voting data as provided by NBC News, as well as any other references. So I'm not going to list those references on every single video. You've got them listed here. I'll try to list them in the actual descriptions as often as possible. If I miss any of those, you've got this information for reference, and you should have the spreadsheet as well if you want to take a look at that. Some breakdown information about how this chart works. Here you've got an average of polling information on the basis of simple moving average. So if I want 18-day moving average, or if I want a 45-day moving average, I can change it there. I can poll up until a few days ago. Let's say I want to see the data up until 7 days ago. So for 21-day moving average would be 28. If I want to use a recall rebalance, that's where I'm basically adjusting for the error in party affiliation or 2020 vote rebalance. The party affiliation rebalance is really not an accurate figure. You really want to look at the 2020 rebalance. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail on other videos. And then you're looking at the weighted moving average. This is where we actually apply the scorecard for each pollster. Pollsters generally in general elections are left leaning. We apply the sample size rebalance to both the raw average and the margin of error. And then we look at how, if the 2020 misses were reapplied here, what this would look like, because there are different pollsters in 2020 as there are in 2024. So we don't have margin of error and statistical bias for all the data for 2020 as we do for 2024. Rather for 2024 as we do for 2020. So there is some value to sort of just looking at what the average turned out to be in 2020, the average miss. So this is the basics of what you're looking at. There will be another video that kind of will go into a little bit more detail, specifically the North Carolina video. Look at that if you want some more information. But here we go. We're just going to use this. This is our basic source of information for all of the next sort of blitz of states moving forward.